The easy version on Pierre Poilievre is that he's the Donald Trump of the North. How accurate do you think that is?
Not at all. And I think there are two problems there. One is that Donald Trump is such a disruptive figure in politics that it becomes an easy comparison for anything, where if you really look hard enough, you can always find some Trump comparison of anyone in politics. And I think it becomes fairly lazy when people do that as a political sport. But I also think that his experiences have been uniquely Canadian in a lot of ways. I think his influences coming from the Reform Party of Alberta of the 1990s, you can look at him as a modern Preston Manning far more than you could look at him as a Canadian Donald Trump.
Well, Donald Trump was raised by a multimillionaire land developer from Queens, New York. And Pierre Poilievre has the most interesting background, perhaps, of, well, I was going to say of any prime minister. He's not prime minister yet, but certainly this guy has a very atypical background. You want to go into some of that?
Yes, and I'll say on this, Canadians have heard the very brief snapshot that he gives in his speeches. The adopted son of two school teachers from Calgary, born to an unwed teenage mother. So people have heard that. And I think there's a lot more complexity there. And we heard glimpses of it from him in some speeches over time. His parents were affected by high interest rates and had to downsize their home. He actually went through a process with his brother to reach out and build a relationship with their biological mother and her family later on in life. And they were certainly interesting. And I think in that way, when he says it's a crazy mixed up family, there's some truth to that.
Yeah, but just for those who don't know, his parents' marriage ended when he was 12 years old. His father ended up with another man. And there doesn't appear to be, at least I didn't read any in your book, this sort of, oh my God, this is so embarrassing and going to ruin my life in Alberta of the 1990s. Why not?
I should say first and foremost that I would have liked if I had had a bit more access to Pierre Poilievre himself, who didn't do an interview for the book. I would have loved to have tried to get a bit more about that, about how this affected you in your life and how you did. But people around him said it was never an issue, that, you know, sure, the divorce may have had the issues you'd expect of a child of, I think, around 12 years old, but his father coming out as gay was not something that he really had an issue with. He's always had a positive relationship with his father and his father's partner, with whom he still is, and who was actually at, you know, the leadership announcement when Pierre Poilievre won in 2022. So it was never an issue from what I gleaned from talking to those around him that caused him much in the way of grief, if any, when he was younger.
Because you can imagine he might have had a tough, you put that on the list of difficult things, parents divorcing, father ending up with another man. That's all, fairly unusual stuff for most people to have to deal with. I don't think I'm being unkind when I say he was not exactly Hercules growing up. He was kind of a goofy-looking kid, in some respects. Any of that all add up to making his childhood more difficult than it needed to be?
Well, he was into athletics. He was actually quite the wrestler. He was the wrestler, and so much so that his father had built one year a wrestling ring in I think it was their front yard, because that was obviously something that Pierre and his friends really liked doing. I also think that when you look at his involvement in politics, he very much had that bookishness and that nerdiness. Like, I did get some questions to his mother and asked, about his favorite books, and the answer she gave was the dictionary. So I don't know if it had much of a plot, but that was what he was reading. And, Milton Friedman's tome, Capitalism and Freedom. So he wasn't immersing himself in the same things that a lot of his colleagues in high school in Calgary would have been.
How did he get mixed up in Reform Party politics?
It was his mother. And it was that wrestling and an injury that he had, tendinitis, that had him basically bored. And he started tagging along with his mother to political events. She was involved in some pro-life circles in the Alberta PC party and ultimately in the federal Reform Party. And he started going to these riding association meetings. And he tried to get a seat on the Riding Association for Preston Manning's Reform Board in Calgary Southwest. And at the time, he was 14. They didn't really have a place for him, but they didn't want to show him the door. So they said, well, why don't you come out and do some phone banking? And he went to this Reform phone bank, and Rob Anders, who later became a Conservative member of Parliament, was running this and took Pierre in and just said he was a natural for this. He was getting credit card numbers, he was getting donations, he was just had this natural confidence on the phone. And I heard about that from someone else, a gentleman by the name of Jason Kenney, for whom Poilievre did some phone banking as well. And Kenney told a story that's in the book where he walks into this room and he doesn't see Poilievre, he hears him. He hears this voice that's doing all of this great work, this confident work on the phones, and he's picturing some lawyerly guy in his 30s, and then this scrawny teenager comes out and says, "Hi, I'm Pierre Poilievre."